Okay, welcome back to our XT500. Been in the thick of it this morning with and had a chat with the owner. Now we went in some depth yesterday. The circuitry, how the scavenge pump essentially draws through here from the bottom, feeds into here, and into here. Originally would have gone back to the tank, but now there's no tank. It now feeds into here, but into here feeds up there, feeds the workings oil pump, if you like, but also there's a hole here that's been drilled into it that hemorrhages oil straight out of there. And if we look at the case here, which is where if it was flush with the end of here, this part was flush with the end of here, it would have gone down there and came out of these two little jet holes and fed the input shaft. It doesn't, it's been chopped off. That's no problem, because we've got a completely different oil circuit now. So with that in mind then, that's been chopped off. So here just hemorrhages out oil. Some of it is hoped to go down that hole to the oil pump, and I'm sure some of it does. But we have had a big end failure, so what we'd like to do is try and increase that oil supply. So we're just going to experiment a little. It's just our take on someone else's take, if you see what I mean. So so yeah, what we're going to propose to do, what I've scratched my head and thought about and everything else here today, is instead of having a hemorrhaging out of here as was original, or originally been this is the original modification here. All I've now done is tap this. It was actually about 7.3, so there's not enough meat there to get an M8 bolt into it. So I've gone M10, and I'm glad I thought about M10, and I'm glad I did, because what I'm going to do, it's not finished yet, so don't, you just got to bear with me here. The cover goes on, obviously, and the bolts in. Now the corresponding half in here has got quite a bit of an area in here that we could maybe utilise. Now a lot of the modern motors, whether it be BMW, anybody, a lot of modern motors use a jet that squirts onto the cylinder wall. Okay, just to make sure that we're not just relying on splash feed coming off the big ends, it actually squirts a degree of oil onto the cylinder wall, only a tiny little hole jet. So because we want to reduce this flow here, coming out here, so we can, in theory, reducing the flow there means more oil is going to our workings oil pump. So why not reduce the flow with something like this? So we've got a banjo bolt, a long banjo bolt, because of the and a spacer to lift it up above the oil pump's cover. Just bear with me while I just nip that up, and you'll see where my train of thought is going with this. So now, if I Loctite that up and a supporting bracket to one of the screws, if I do that, we now have a jet, a reduction jet, instead of it just hemorrhaging out over the gearbox. We can have a reduction jet spraying directly at the cylinder wall, and the conrod is underneath here, so it won't just hit the conrod. I mean, we're going to be spraying big end and but cylinder wall. In doing that, we also attain more oil to the workings oil pump and a takeoff for our cylinder bore. Now I think that's the way forward with this. Our scavenge pump is obviously bigger than our main pump, so we're going to produce, in theory, from the bottom here, more oil than excuse me, than the main pump. So what we're going to do, it will be able to come out of there, and I'm hoping that that is pretty much as good as we need to squirt oil onto the bore. And also we're sending more oil by restricting this we're sending more oil into the oil pump, which is fed from the previous video. So if you're not with me with that, you need to watch that other one, which then in turn feeds down here and into the oil filter, and it's filtered and feeds the into the end of the crank for the big end. Okay, so if we're, instead of just putting a bung in there with a hole in it to just reducing, why don't we aim it, the reduction, at the cylinder wall? Now that's where a lot of the modern engines use a device similar to that. They're tapped into the oil gallery and they squirt up into the cylinder bore. What is to go, you know, what's not to like, sort of thing with that. That's my in as much as if we're reducing it here, why not reduce it and aim it somewhere where we need it to be. The owner says he's struggling with keeping the oil in this coming up the breather. Was it a case of, just was it, I don't know, who knows, but was it a case of the amount of oil that was coming out of there hitting the gearbox was flinging it straight up and trying to get it out there? Who knows? I don't know. We don't know. All we're trying to say is we're just scratching our head and scratching whatever and thinking how we're going to, what way to try this, and for me this is the way to try it. So I'm going to make up the bracketry to make sure that this can't fail, but what I need to do now in here is to give myself clearance here. So I have to take that down now, hence the air hacksaw. Drastic measures. Okay, that looks like it's just had a grinder in there to take that off originally, but I need to get it down just to that point there, where that little bridge is there. If I can get that off flat down there, that means that when this case comes over here onto here, it'll be really close to the end of that bolt, as long as we've got clearance, because I'll do a mock-up build, but it also means that can't come out. He can't come out then. And if we have a little check strap around this to that bolt, he can't swing round anyway. It's clear of the gears, because I had the shaft back in then and made sure that we've got clearance of that. So I think it's possibly going to be a win-win doing it this way. Reduction means more oil to the secondary oil pump, or let's say, it gets confusing, but the main oil, the oil pump that's required to pump oil around the workings. Okay, that gets more oil delivered to it because it now doesn't have the oil tank delivering to it. It just relies on the scavenge pump delivering to it, as the previous video. So reducing it down, we don't hemorrhage oil out of the gearbox and blow it up the breather, if that's what's happening, but we do reduce it down to aid more flow to the workings, and also we reduce the hole size, we increase the pressure. So if we can fire oil straight at that cylinder wall there, that to me is a win-win, because this bike did try and seize. So check the previous video was on it, it did try and seize. So I think, you know, all I'm trying to do here is, we're trying to belt and braces it, aren't we? That's the best description of it. We're trying to make sure it doesn't happen, you know, it doesn't happen again. Apparently he has another one of these that hasn't been a minute's trouble, so you know, I must emphasise the fact that this does work. It obviously does work. Anyway, whatever happened to this one happened, so all we're going to try and do is stop it happening again. I think that's the best description of it. So anyway, onwards with it now. I need to chop this off with the air hacksaw to give me clearance for that inside here. It will be aiming up there at the cylinder wall, like that. Catch it in a bit. Right, I've just got the torch shining in. I've cut back the section. I'm hoping you can see through there. We can see that we've got clearance completely from everything that we need with the cases together, without anything installed. So we've got complete clearance in there, so I don't know if that, I'm hoping that that's picking it up just in there. I've just nipped it up, kind of pointing in the right angle that we want it to be, so bear with me, I'll put it down. Have another look. You need 3 hands for this job. Right, see if we can get it now. Can we see it? I think perhaps the only way, I wonder if I can get the camera actually down inside. Wow, that'd be a good Right, camera's in crankcases, so bear with me, but there it is. Even I don't know what that looks like, so there we go. There's the, I'm hoping, there's the banjo fitting, sat inside the cases, in the mouth of the crankcase where the barrel sits. So, take the camera out again. So he's squirting now oil towards the cylinder, towards the liner. Did we just get it? I think we just get it there, do we? I think we do, yeah. Yeah, massive clean outs to be done here. And there's some, I'll touch on that in a minute. Let's just, right, I'm going to put it down, I'll separate the halves again. He says, can we get their arms apart? Always stick on dowels, don't you, when you, right, or dowel, I hasten to add. Right, because there's one missing. Anyway, yeah, we've only got that one. There should be one in there, unless it's. Well, then now, anyway, unless it's in the part that has it came to me. So, never mind. Okay, so what we've got now, we're feeding into here, up there, and into this chamber here. So because this chamber now is reduced by this jet, we're going to get more go to the oil pump that supplies the bearings and the big end. At the same time, we're going to get a jet of oil aiming towards the cylinder liner, as per most modern vehicles that do that anyway these days. So let's right good clean this. So yeah, we can put the cover on. I need to just make a little tab that goes to the bolts that stops any kind of failure. That there, I modded that back slightly. Where's the bit out? It was like, see the small hole there where it originally would have fed oil into this clutch shaft, and then it ultimately out through the bearing, but it's relying on kind of a bit of splash in there now. So it does make me wonder whether it should have, I mean, some will still go down there, there's no doubt about that, and that's not ultimately close to the end of there. So with the amount of splash and whatever flying around there, you're going to get some go in there. I do wonder to make a trough in there actually, just with the air, you know, the rotary air, and make a little trough for it to sit in. That as it's flying around, the oil flying around, it will drop into the trough and it have to go down here. Maybe do that as well. Again, it's belt and braces, but this is the bit that I've took off. It was, where was it? It was like that. It was just like that before I took that section off to give us clearance for our bolt head. Well, it's our reducer. You could have just put a grub screw in there, like I say, with a hole in the end of it, and it would have just fired kind of, it would have fired at that. But I think firing that way, I mean, you could still put a hole in the end of there that would aim at that. Still could put a hole in the end of that banjo bolt that would aim at that. It would aim straight down there then. So look, I do feel that I'm not going to use the word better. I'm not saying it's better. I do feel you see, I'm being careful. I mean, I'm not, there's too many people out there that just want to slate other people's work and stuff like that. That's not what I'm about. That's not what the motor trade and the racing world is full of, that he's better than him and he's better than him and he's crap and he ain't and all that sort of stuff. So, but anyway, this is my take on it. Call it what you will. You know, this is my take on it, on how we move forward with the problem that we've encountered. So so there we go. I'm hoping this will cure the problem. As we speak, it's a way having a big end. It's a way having the big end replaced. So you know, last thing we want to do, we've got a new piston, last thing we want to do is have any kind of oiling issues with the new components. So, right, absolutely brilliant. Right, okay. Yeah, we'll move on when I've done a bit more. Okie doke. Back to XT500 motor. Okay, bit of a busy day with it. On the grand scheme of things, it doesn't look that big, but working out and working what we're going to do and scratching head and everything else. So anyway, originally this was open, just bleeding off oil pressure from here. The way it was, there has been a hole drilled through the blank, underneath this blank, through the oil return pipe to get into this gallery that's been blanked off here, but to get into that gallery just behind this plug to be able to feed essentially into here. It goes kind of like out of this chamber here, up here a little bit, and then into that. Okay, so that then supplies the oil pump to pump oil around our bearings, crank bearings and camshaft. Now, the way it is at the minute, this is just open. This was just open. So train of thought is that perhaps we were bleeding off too much oil from here and not enough was going into here to lubricate the big end and obviously piston, cylinder, that sort of thing. I mean, I know it's only a small area and there's a lot of splashing going on, but at the end of the day we have had a big end failure. Whether it was related to this or not, no one will ever know, and no one is insinuating anything, but we do know we have had a big end failure. So, also, irrespective of the big end failure, the amount that the scavenge pump is pumping just tends to bleed out here. It's just bleeding out of here. Just, is that an issue with this, as we've said before, with this perhaps blowing a bit up too much up the breather? I don't know. But anyway, so we decided what we needed to do was needed to restrict this. Just a bit. Restrict it, which means, again, we've got X flow, and if we've got 50% going down here, and just if 50% going down there and 50% going ultimately to the crank bearings and the big end, if we restrict that, say, to 20% out of here and 80% to the crank bearings, then perhaps that's a better thing. Who knows? I'm not saying it is, I'm not saying it isn't. So we know we needed a restrictor. What I've come up with is a bracket with a Goodrich brake hose banjo fitting, tapped out to M10 1.25, spacer to rise it above the cover, and a locking tab welded onto it so that when this is in, it cannot rotate round, touch a gear, or so. If we just nip that first on the oil pump cover, just give that just a nip, there we go, and you can see what's kind of happening here. So what we've got now is, when this is tight, we have enough clearance. We've got enough clearance now to get that in this case. Now I've removed, obviously the first bit's been removed by somebody else, I've removed that bit, and now that bit gives me the clearance there to get that bit in. So now we are restricting the hemorrhaging of oil out of there. We're going to turn that into a little bit of a jet, and as per most modern engines, and it's certainly not a hindrance in any way, we're going to fire a jet of oil at the piston skirt and the bottom of the cylinder, the way most motors do it nowadays. They tap into the oil gallery and they have a little jet pointing upwards that can spray onto the underside of the piston. So we've achieved restricting the bleed off, but we've restricted it by pointing it at the cylinder, which for me is a win-win. Also, in the end of there, I have drilled a little hole in the end of there, so it would come out like a jet, out like that screwdriver, which will aim ultimately like that screwdriver back into here. Okay, so to just put the splash lubrication in here. I don't really have an issue with that. The ones here aren't pressure fed in any way. They get enough oil, so you know, inside here is, it's also going to be a quantity of oil in here anyway that remains in here. So that's my train of thought, that's my mod, that's the way I see we go forward. And as I say, for me personally, I mean, feel free to leave me your comments, but for me that's a win-win. We need to block some of that hole off to divert more oil to the workings. So by blocking a bit of that hole off, instead of just putting like a grub screw in with a hole through the middle, like a jet in essence, like a main jet, you know, in a carb, let's put a banjo in. There's our restriction in there. So we're going to fire, when what it is trying to pump through here, it's going to fire it at that rather than just out over the gearbox. Remember, it's open here between the crank and the gearbox. Everything that comes off this big end and these main bearings is getting thrown all over here. There is absolutely no problem with lubrication here. So that's my conclusion. That's the way forward I feel we go. And well, that's it. I suppose it's now get everything ready for when we get the crank back, etc., and we'll take it to the next level. Okay.